We're going to take a look at the analysis of alternatives. And whenever you develop a business case, it's a pretty good bet that there is actually more than one way to solve the problem or seize the opportunity that you're trying to get at. And what we're going to do is give you a little framework about how to think about analyzing the various alternatives that you might come up with. When we talk about an analysis of alternatives, we begin with our initial benefit calculations and the expense budget and the asset budget that we've developed. And from there, we ask 4 questions. The first is, how can we increase our benefit? Secondly, how can we realize the benefit sooner? Remember, the time value of money. So while the overall benefits might be the same over the course of the planning horizon, if we pull those benefits in sooner, then the overall return on investment is going to be higher. Next is, how can we lower our costs? Very simply, are there things that we can do that will actually take our expenses or require a lower investment in assets in order to accomplish the same thing? And then finally, can we push our costs out in the future? Again, the time value of money comes into play. If we can push our costs out in the future, even though the overall costs might be the same because $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, by pushing our costs out into the future, it too improves our return on investment picture. What we need to do is, when we think about the analysis of alternatives, the basic analysis that we've done before, where we come up with net cash flow, discount the cash flow, and then divide by the initial investment to come up with return on investment. What we do is we focus our analysis of alternatives on our benefits and our costs. And there's 2 general effects. There are magnitude effects. That is, does the alternative increase either our costs or benefit, or does it decrease either our costs or benefit? And we take a look at the magnitude effects, the size of the overall effect of the alternative on both our benefits and costs. And then the second way we need to take a look at analyzing alternatives is the timing effects. Does it push benefits out in the future, or does that push costs out in the future? Does it pull them in? Does it change the overall profile of the planning horizon? And we take a look at alternatives from both of those perspectives. And it's a fairly simple process of simply taking a look at the various pros and cons of the alternatives that we can come up with. And from there, we take a look at our pros and cons, and we determine what are the magnitude effects and what are the timing effects, either our pros and our cons. And we put this in very real monetary terms. You can begin by simply thinking in terms of a plus or minus. Does this alternative increase benefit or decrease costs, or does this alternative decrease our benefit and increase our costs, or some various combination of either one of those 2? And from there, what we need to do is simply create a new cash flow statement, taking into account all the assumptions we made about the alternative. What does that do over the course of the planning horizon for our benefits, our expenses, our investment in our assets? And from there, we simply calculate the net present value, the ROI, and the payback for each one of our alternatives, much like we've done before. And then it's simply laying that all out. So taking a look at our base case, we have that to begin with. What's the NPV, ROI, and payback? And then for each one of the alternatives, what is the NPV, ROI, and payback? And we pick the alternative, or it could very well be the base case. We pick which either alternative gives us the best return on investment and the highest net present value. We can take a look at payback as well, but remember all the dangers of using payback in calculations. And then the other thing we need to do when it comes to laying out our alternatives is we need to articulate our assumptions. And this is really important. By writing out your assumptions clearly and succinctly, you are able to actually not only present your alternatives and the various factors that entered into your analysis of those alternatives, but it forces you to think through the process. And like we've said from the very beginning of this course, writing is thinking. And by the mere act of writing out your assumptions, causes you to think about them in a more careful and deliberate way. So there you have it. There's a framework for taking a look at how you would analyze alternatives in a business case framework. And what I would invite you to do is to actually think through this process for your particular business case, come up with what the various alternatives might be, and then taking a look at both the magnitude effects and timing effects of the pros and cons for each one of your alternatives.